All right, everybody, welcome back to this subsection of our research methods course. And today we're going to be talking all about plagiarism, how to write papers, and how to do citations. Okay? So, first off, plagiarism. What is it? It is using somebody else's ideas or information and presenting it as if it was your own, right? And that's bad. That's theft of other people's ideas and thoughts and the things they've actually done, their work, right? But we do this all the time in research. We use other people's information. We talk about other people's research and conclusions and all their work, right? But the trick is we always cite it. We always tell the reader exactly where we got every piece of information that isn't our own. Okay? And that gives credit to those original authors. And not only that, if somebody says, "Oh, what? That's crazy. Is that really true?" They can look up where we got it and figure out exactly what that original author was trying to say. And kind of, fact check every piece of research by going to the original, where we cited it from, so they can read that original and see exactly what that author was saying and exactly what research they did and exactly what methods they used, etc., etc. So we want to use a citation anytime we write anything that isn't super common knowledge, like, humans are generally living people, but sometimes they die. All right, that's common knowledge, right? I would even say that something like, the United States has 50 states. That would be common enough knowledge that we wouldn't need to cite it. But unless it's our original thought or one of those pieces of common knowledge, we need to cite it. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I still need to occasionally, contact a colleague and say, "Hey, does this qualify as common knowledge or not?" And when in doubt, A, ask somebody smarter than you, or B, cite it anyway. There's never a downside to citing too much, right? Now, if we're going to go out and find information that we are going to cite, where do we find it? The absolute best place to find it is in the peer-reviewed literature, right? So we talked about this a little bit in the previous subsection, how that whole peer review process works. That is, because it's been through that rigorous process to ensure that the proper methods were used and the proper conclusions were drawn, and there aren't completely bonkers factors that went into this research. Because it's been through that obstacle course, if you will, that is kind of the pinnacle of where we should be finding information to put into our papers and our literature reviews and so on and so forth. There are a bunch of different databases of peer-reviewed research. Okay, if you go to your university's website, usually through the library, you'll be able to find some kind of databases where you can search for peer-reviewed journal articles. The two I've found that work the best in criminal justice are EBSCO, which is also called Academic Search Complete, and ProQuest. If you don't have access to a university, you can always use Google Scholar, although Google Scholar a lot of times will only show you kind of small pieces of articles, and then you have to pay money to find the entire article. There are some other places where you can find peer-reviewed research. Some of it's open to the public and free. Some of it costs money. But again, you need to make sure that the journals you're viewing are peer-reviewed, high-quality journals. There are things called predatory journals out there, which will publish, anything you care to write down, usually in exchange for a monetary fee from the author, or the author has to pay to get their paper published. And those predatory journals will publish anything, so they can't be trusted. So if you have any questions about whether some piece of research is legitimate or not, Google the name of the journal and find out if they're a high quality journal or if they're just some predatory journal that will publish any old crap in exchange for money. You can also look to a certain type of book, right? Especially if it's from a university press of some kind. Um, there will be lots of good scientific information in these kind of high quality books. On the other hand, these days, anybody who wants to can get any kind of book published that they want to. So, again, you kind of need to research the publisher to see whether they're um, high quality academic standards or whether they're just some operation that will publish anything to make money, right? Newspapers, or, these days, newspaper websites are usually pretty good, especially if you're just kind of want to cite it as on this date, this event happened. You can find good information from newspapers. Depending on your field, you might need to look at official statistics or official data. In criminal justice, we often use the FBI's Uniform Crime Report. We have to cite that to when we talk about, whether crime is increasing or decreasing, or, this crime happened this much in this state in this year, right? We can go to the FBI and their official statistics for that kind of thing. And then another big one in the field of criminal justice is court cases. Whether it's a Supreme Court case or an appeals court case or a state Supreme Court case or something, those are very often used in criminal justice or law or political science papers, theses, dissertations, etc. And court cases have their own special rules about how to cite and when to cite, and what should be italicized and what information you should give for this and that. Outside of those sources, I would be reticent to really cite anything if you're trying to use it as a claim to reality or truth. Occasionally you will need to cite something that's outside of this realm, somebody's website or somebody's, just some other source outside of good academic or truly fact and science-based sources like this. But those should be few and far between. You should really, really, really try and make sure that the reason you're citing it is a good one, and not trying to claim something. You're not trying to claim that there is some scientific fact that you found on the internet at billybobsblog.com, right? So be very, very careful if you're trying to use a source that is not on this list, right? Now, how do we cite research? What is the actual process? What does it look like on the page? Well, the good news is, in the field of criminal justice, we use the APA format, the American Psychological Association. Why we don't have our own format, I don't know. But APA is pretty nice. I've been using it my entire career. I really enjoy the APA citation style. And there is a resource through the University of Purdue that teaches you all about the ins and outs of how to use the APA format. Okay? It's called the Purdue OWL, or Online Writing Lab. And if you just Google Purdue OWL, it will bring you right to that website. It tells you all the rules about all the different APA citation stuff. If you have a question like, how do I cite a television show or something? It'll have that information right on there. You just have to, find the correct category and look at that, and it'll say, if you need to cite this, it looks like that. So it's a really, really, really good resource. And again, I've been doing this job for a long, long, long time, and I still find myself going to the Purdue OWL website to, check exactly how I'm supposed to be citing something all the time. When it comes to citations, there are a few different things that you need to kind of look out for. Number one, direct quotes versus paraphrasing. The vast majority of the time when you cite somebody else's research, we should be paraphrasing what they said. Use our words to describe their ideas or conclusions or data or whatever, right? And then cite them. But it's, the actual text of the sentence is our words. The ideas and information contained is somebody else's, but it's our words actually on the paper, right? That's a paraphrase. That should be used the vast majority of the time. But occasionally, you really want to use a direct quote for some reason because it's really applicable. The exact wording matters, something like that. In that case, we can use a direct quote with slightly different rules about how they're cited. But you can do that, and there's rules about how to do those direct quotes, which we'll talk about here in a second. There's also two different kinds of citations you have to worry about. There's the in-text citation, which is, as you're reading the paper, you get to a little thing and it says usually like the name and the year of the source where you found it, right? And as you're reading through a text, as you're reading through a paper, you're going to find bunches and bunches of these in-text citations that are little, in parentheses, hints at where you got that source from, right? Then at the end of the paper, there's a big long list in alphabetical order of all the sources that you had for the in-text citations with much more information about each one. So while the in-text citation might only have the name of the author and the year it was published, the entry for that in-text citation in that works cited page at the end of the paper is going to have a whole bunch more information, right? Not only the name of the author and the year, but the title of the paper, the publisher, what volume of what journal it was published in, all that kind of thing, right? So if you're reading along on a paper and you say, oh man, I really want to find that source, you look at the in-text citation, use that information to then go down into the works cited page, find all the information about that source, and then you can find a copy of it yourself and actually know what that author of the first paper was citing and talking about when it comes to that source that they cited. One of the biggest mistakes I find in student papers is that there are in-text citations that don't have a corresponding entry in the works cited page, or the other way around. Every entry in your works cited page should have one or more in-text citations to go along with it, and every in-text citation has to have an entry in the works cited page that's down there, right? But each time we do an in-text citations, we can use the same source multiple times. So if we cite one source 5 times with in-text citations in different parts of our paper, we still only need the one entry in our works cited page. But each one of those in-text citations has to have a corresponding entry in the works cited page, and every entry in the works cited page has to have at least one in-text citation. So make sure, if you're ever writing a paper for me, that those match up. If you have a works cited page with 5 entries, make sure there's 5 different in-text citations with those 5 sources, right? And again, you can have more than one in-text citation for every works cited entry, but you have to have at least one, right? Now, sometimes when you're doing the paraphrase, you want to mention the author's names in the text of the sentence that you're writing, right? So like in his very important book, Johnson wrote that such and such happened, right? You can do that. You can also just say such and such happened and then put the citation at the end. There are different rules for doing that, which again we're going to talk about here in a minute. But importantly, when you're talking about the names of authors as part of your sentence, you don't use their first name. Don't talk about the title of their paper or the title of their book or what journal it was published in. That'll all come later in the works cited page. Just use their last name or last names if there's multiple authors. You don't need the first initial, the first name, just Jennings claimed that blah, blah, blah happened, right? You really don't need to add any of that other information. All that other information is there in the works cited page if people need to know it, right? And then there are different rules based on the number of authors. So if a paper only has one author, relatively simple. But if it has 2 or more authors, there are other things you have to do. You list every author in the works cited page. But with the in-text citations, the rules are a little different. And we're going to go over that now, okay? So I've got some fake quotations I made up, some fake scientific claims here, just to show you how these citations are supposed to work, okay? So, and this might be different for things like court cases or TV shows or, whatever. This is just a very general, this is what you're going to see most common with either books or peer-reviewed journal articles, that kind of thing. This is how it looks. But again, in special circumstances, like Supreme Court cases, it's going to look different, okay? But if you only have one author for a book or a journal article or whatever, if you want to directly quote them, it will look like that up at the top, where we have the quotation marks around the quotation, but then importantly, no punctuation at the end of the quotation other than the closing quotation marks, right? Then the in-text citations is within parentheses. It's got the last name, comma, the year, comma, and then the page number of that original work where you can find this thing we directly quoted. And then only after the citation does the actual end of sentence punctuation come, which is almost always going to be a period, but it might be a question mark, might be an exclamation point, whatever. So again, if you're going to use a direct quote, make sure you have the quotation marks and make sure you have the page number as part of the citation. If you're paraphrasing them, you just have, you paraphrase what they said, and then again, no punctuation until after the citation. Open parentheses, last name, comma, year, close parentheses, and then the punctuation, right? But because you're paraphrasing, you don't need a page number. You don't need quotation marks. All you need to do is make sure you have that last name, the year, and then, again, punctuation after the citation, not before, right? And then if you actually use their name as part of your paraphrase, you just do insert their name into the sentence wherever it makes the most sense. So in this case, Jennings found that his cat was the cutest of all time. And then you put the citation directly after the name, not at the end of the sentence. And since you just used their name, you don't need that part. You just need the year, right? So Jennings, open parentheses, year, close parentheses, found that blah, 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 right? And you continue on with your sentence. All right? Now, with two authors, same thing. If you're going to do a direct quote, you need the quotation marks, you need the page number. Don't put punctuation until after the citation. Paraphrase, again, same thing. The only difference is that instead of just last name, you put last name and then the ampersand, which is the fancy and sign. So last name, ampersand, second last name, comma, and the year. Or comma, year, comma, page number if it's a direct quote, right? But importantly, if you're going to use that author's name or names in text as part of, as part of your sentence, you don't use the ampersand, you spell out the word and, A-N-D, right? So Smith and Johnson, and then just like with one author, parentheses, year, close parentheses, claim that, blah, 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 right? So if the in-text citation includes the names within the parentheses, you use the ampersand. If you're using the author's names as part of your sentence, you spell out and, A-N-D. Okay, but other than that, it's essentially the same as an in-text citation with one author, right? If you have more than two authors, whether that's 3 or whether it's 10, or, there are some physics papers with like 100 different authors, right? We don't want to write out all those names. So what we do is we just use the first name and then et al. E-T space A-L period, which is fancy Latin for essentially everybody else. So in this case, in this example that I've pulled up, it's Duval et al, comma, year, and then comma, page number if it's a direct quote, right? But all those same rules apply for direct quotes versus paraphrases versus authors named as part of the text. Punctuation always goes after the citation. But with et al, you can actually use that et al in the sentence, right? So Duval et al, parentheses, year, parentheses, found that this thing and this thing and this thing, right? So I hope that wasn't too confusing. And again, there are going to be slightly different rules for things that don't have one person or two people or a list of people as authors, like Supreme Court cases. So if you're at all confused, just go to that Purdue OWL website. But then every in-text citation, remember, has to have an entry in the works cited page. The works cited page looks something like this. This is one I actually pulled out of one of my papers that I wrote. So you'll see that it's last name, first initial, then last name, first initial if it's multiple authors, then the year in parentheses, then the title of the work, whether it's a journal article or a book or whatever, the title of the work, then in italics, the name of the journal, and then exactly what journal number and what pages the entire work is, right? So if you look at that first entry up there on the top, it's 4 authors, each with their first initial. 2012 was the year, the name of their article, then in italics, the journal it was printed in, then the volume and issue numbers, then the entire work was on page 460 to 478, right? So that's what an end of text citation should kind of look like. And here's a bunch of examples for you of these different, there's books in there. So Olson P, We Are Anonymous, that is a book. So it has slightly different rules for how that end of text citation works compared to, say, a peer-reviewed journal article. But that, there's some examples for you right there on what a works cited page should look like. Also notice that there's what's called a hanging indent. So usually with indentations, it's the first line indented in and every subsequent line, at the margins of the page. With a hanging indent on a works cited page, the first line is all the way over on the side and every subsequent line is indented in, right? So you can see that first entry, the first line is way over on the left, and every subsequent line is indented in until the next entry, which again, all the way over to the left for the first line, then in subsequent lines indented, right? That's very easy to do with your computer program of choice that you're writing your paper on, whether it's Microsoft Word or Google Docs or whatever. You can just Google hanging indent in Microsoft Word or hanging indent in Google Docs, and it should be really easy. Just highlight it, click a couple of buttons, choose hanging indent, boom, it does it all for you, okay? The other good thing about these works cited pages is these days, the databases where you're going to find sources have automatic citation generators. So whenever you find your source, you think, oh, this paper would work really well for this upcoming research I'm doing. You just have to kind of click one button where it says cite this in APA format, and it pops up with exactly this. All you have to do is copy and paste it right into your paper. Super quick, super easy. You don't actually have to sit there and write all this information out. It's just a couple of button clicks when you find the source, and boom, it's there, already set for you, ready to go. Also notice that each entry is in alphabetical order by the first letter of the last name of the first author. So you want every entry to be in that alphabetical order. If you have multiple entries with the same name or names, you organize them by date, which I don't think I have in this particular example, but there you go. All right, so here's my process for writing a lit review or some kind of academic, like a student paper or something. Here's my process. If this works for you, feel free to use it. If you have some other process that works better for you, feel free to ignore this part. This really, really worked for me as somebody with pretty severe ADHD. Don't know if you can tell from my lecture videos. But whenever I am going to begin the process of writing some kind of, a literature review or back when I was a student, when I was writing student papers, step one was to kind of, choose my topic. What is the point of my paper? What field is it about? Is it about the death penalty? Is it about gun control? Is it about whatever, right? Once I have that information, I go onto my library's website, go into those databases of research papers, and start searching for any article in that field, gun control, the death penalty, whatever. And I start getting the full article and printing them. And depending on the length of the paper, if it's a short, just kind of 10-page-ish student paper, I'd print, 8 to 10 articles. For larger ones, like my dissertation, I had 100 different articles. I mean, it was pretty nuts. But I'd print them all out, like hard copy, because, I'm old and I like hard copy things. Staple them, so each paper is stapled together. And I have a big stack of these. And then I go through and read each one. And anytime I came across a sentence or a fact or an important point that author would make, I would highlight it. And then keep going. Oh, that's a really important point. Highlight that. Oh, their results showed this. That's important. I want to talk about that. Highlight that, right? Once I've gone through and read and highlighted each one of my sources, I open a document on my computer, title it Outline, and then I give kind of, okay, based on what I read, here's generally what I want to talk about, the order I want to talk about it in, right? So if I'm writing a paper on the death penalty, I might say, section 1 is going to be the history of the death penalty. Section 2 is going to be modern use of the death penalty. Section 3 is going to be monetary costs. Section 4 is going to be people who were later found to be innocent after being sentenced to death were actually given the death penalty. And then the next section might be moral and religious arguments, right? Once I have kind of my sections in the order I want them, I pick up my first source and I look for the first thing I highlighted. And I say, where would I talk about that? If it's about the history of the death penalty, I'm going to say, oh, this source, has a statement about the history of the death penalty that I want to make sure and talk about. So I go back to my outline, and then under history of the death penalty, I put whatever fact it was that I highlighted in very short words, just brief paraphrase of what it was, and then put the in-text citation, the last name, the date, right, for that paper, that source that I found it in. Then I move on to the next thing I highlighted, put that into the outline somewhere with a very brief description of what it was, and then the last name and the date. And then go through all of my sources, putting all of the things I highlighted into the outline in the section they need to be outlined in, the section they need to be discussed in. Then once I've gone through all my sources, all my kind of things from my sources that I want to talk about, I go back to my outline, and I just kind of, fiddle around with what order do I really want to talk about things in. I might shift one major section to before this other major section, or just within sections, like I want to make sure I talk about this first, then this one, then this one, then this one. And I kind of put them in the order I really want to talk about, right? I get everything organized, so now I know what I'm going to say, what sources I'm going to talk about, what things that I learned from all these different sources I'm going to mention, and in what order. And then at that point, it becomes super easy plug and chug. Right? I just start typing and link each one of those ideas, each one of those facts, each one of those things that I found to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. I have the organization of my paper, what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. I even have the in-text citations ready to go. So when I get to the end of something that I learned from one of my sources, I don't actually have to go over and pull up the source and look up the last name and the thing. It's right there in my outline. So I've got my outline open on one screen, I've got my paper open on another screen, and I can just kind of glance back and forth and turn that outline into just a paper. And that's the easiest step of the whole process, right? Because I know what I'm going to say, I know the facts I'm going to kind of discuss and link and talk about. I just need to make it into an actual paper with, English words and stuff, rather than just a series of facts that my outline is in, right? So it's super easy, super efficient process. And again, this process really works well for me. If some other process works for you, feel free to use that. Feel free to modify this process in whatever way you'd like. But that's it. We're done. That is our research methods course. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope this course has inspired some of you to actually become researchers. But even if not, if you don't want to become a researcher, that's fine. That's perfectly okay. I hope this course made you a much better research consumer. I hope that you're going to be much more confident going out and reading about science and research and political polling and crime stats and, you know, all those different pieces of research that we all get inundated with, you know, by newspapers and television news and, you know, social media and all those things. Anytime anybody makes some kind of claim about reality or science or crime or whatever, you now have the tools to go and find the most accurate scientific data that we have on the subject and really understand it, right? So that's what I hope for you, you know, all the people watching this. I hope that you are now more confident and more capable in being consumers of research and understanding all that stuff that you see in your daily life. And you're able to know and understand just a little bit more than before you took this class. So once again, thank you so much for watching. I know these lectures can be long and some of them are more entertaining and more boring than others. But if you're still around after all this time, I really appreciate you allowing me to discuss this with you, and I hope you learned something. So thank you very much.